Rain should be dramatic only in movies. In real life, it's mostly inconvenient, a wet slap from the sky that ruins hair and mascara. But that night, sitting in my car outside the Madison Hotel, it decided to audition for a role. Each droplet hit the windshield like an impatient tap, urging me to admit what I already knew. Luke wasn't working late. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. He said he had an emergency meeting with a client, something about server migration and code audits, words I never cared enough to understand. But his tie had looked too perfect, his shoes too polished for a guy pulling an all-nighter, and that smirk, half nervous, half rehearsed, when I'd kissed him goodbye, had felt like a hint dropped by a lazy screenwriter. I waited anyway. I told myself I was overreacting, that it could be nothing, but then I saw it, his silver sedan parked 3 rows ahead, windshield wipers swaying like a metronome. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. He never brought that car to work late. He said he preferred taking ride shares for safety. Maybe that was true. Safety from me, apparently. The hotel lobby doors slid open, and there he was. Luke Carver, husband, tech manager, serial liar. He walked out under a shared umbrella, his arm curled around a woman's shoulder. They were laughing, leaning close in that way people do when they want the world to disappear. She had long auburn hair and a trench coat too fancy for the rain. I didn't honk, didn't step out. I just watched. The wipers squeaked across the glass, and I counted 1, 2, 3, until they disappeared into the night. My hands were steady, which scared me more than if they'd shaken. You expect rage, maybe tears. What I felt was a kind of stillness, like everything had just paused, not broken, just stopped. He told me he was working late. I guess that's one way to define teamwork. I pulled out my phone, zoomed in, and took a few photos. They weren't dramatic, just 2 people under one umbrella, but context gives everything flavor. I saved them in a hidden folder named Project Sunset. Then I put my phone face down, started the engine, and drove home. The drive was quiet. No music, just the soft hum of the car heater and the slap of wet tires on asphalt. My mind wandered back through the last few months. The new cologne, the gym membership he suddenly needed, the way he'd started wearing button-downs instead of hoodies, how he locked his phone, changed his passwords, said you wouldn't understand whenever I asked about work. I understood plenty. When I got home, the neighborhood was sleeping. Our street looked like a real estate brochure. Identical houses, trimmed lawns, the illusion of peace. I parked, turned off the lights, and sat for a moment in the dark driveway. The house looked calm from the outside, every light off except the porch one, still glowing like it trusted him to come home. Inside, everything smelled like us. Citrus cleaner, candles, the faint trace of Luke's cologne that used to make me smile. Now it just made the air feel dishonest. I hung up my soaked coat, slipped off my shoes, and stood in the kitchen. The clock above the stove read 11:42 p.m. Luke's text buzzed through. Running late. Don't wait up. I looked at it, laughed once under my breath, and wrote back, Sure. See you soon. Then I placed the phone next to the sink, as if it were contagious. I made tea I didn't drink. I walked through our living room, where everything we'd built sat obediently in place. The framed vacation photos, the couch we argued over buying, the half-dead fern on the coffee table he promised he'd water. Every piece of furniture felt like an inside joke now, except the punchline was me. When he finally came home around 1, I was lying on the couch, pretending to doze. The door clicked open, then closed. His footsteps paused when he saw me. Hey, he said, voice soft like he was testing the room temperature. You're up? I murmured. Couldn't sleep. He kissed my cheek, smelled faintly of rain and something floral that wasn't mine. "Rough night," he said, pulling off his jacket. "Server outage. We just got it fixed." I nodded. "Long outage." He didn't notice the tone. He never does when he's sure of himself. He mumbled something about taking a shower and disappeared down the hall. The sound of running water filled the silence. I stared at the ceiling fan, slow spinning shadows across the white paint, and thought about how trust doesn't crack. It erodes. When he climbed into bed later, I stayed on the couch. He didn't ask why. Maybe he thought I'd fallen asleep, or maybe he was too tired to pretend. The next morning, sunlight made everything look falsely innocent. Luke left early, whistling, wearing the same cologne that now felt like a cover-up. As soon as his car turned the corner, I opened my laptop. I created a new design folder. Case study, authenticity. It was the kind of ironic label that made me smirk. Inside it, I dropped the photos from last night. Then I started sketching. Not people, not faces, just shapes. The umbrella, the shimmer of the hotel light against the rain. The distance between two people walking close together. I drew until noon, fueled by coffee and sarcasm. My phone buzzed with texts from neighbors about the upcoming HOA bake sale. Caroline Meyer, our self-appointed queen of suburban morality, wanted everyone to bring something cheerful. Maybe I'd bake lies. By afternoon, my brain had shifted into what I called design autopilot, the calm I only reached when I was creating. It's funny how betrayal can sharpen focus. Luke called once during lunch. I let it ring. He texted, "You okay?" I typed, "Perfectly fine, working late myself." That evening, Caroline showed up at my door holding banana bread. "You look tired lately," she said, eyes sharp beneath fake concern. "Everything okay with Luke?" "Of course," I said with a smile that could slice glass. "He's just busy. Big project." Her smile widened, too satisfied. "You know men with big projects. They start feeling important." "I'm sure you'd know," I said sweetly. She didn't catch the jab until she was halfway down the walkway. When she left, I poured a glass of wine and sat at my desk. The rain had returned, drumming softly outside, as if the universe wanted a soundtrack for deceit. I opened the folder again, those photos glowing back at me like quiet proof. No need for confrontation yet. Confrontations end stories. I was just starting mine. Over the next few days, I watched Luke's patterns. Same excuses, same late nights, same emergency meetings. Each lie so predictable, it became almost elegant in its structure. I collected them like samples in a lab. He once left his second phone. Yes, the shiny new one he swore was for testing app security, on the counter. A message popped up from someone named M. I didn't need to open it. The preview said enough. "Can't wait for next time." I took a photo of that too. Evidence, but not for police or therapists. Evidence for art. For closure. Friday came with another storm, like nature had signed a contract with my mood. Luke announced another late meeting, kissed my forehead, and left. I followed 10 minutes later, calm as a detective in a low-budget thriller. The Madison Hotel again. Predictable. I parked 2 rows behind his car. The lobby light spilled onto the wet pavement like liquid truth. I saw her again. Madeline. Same hair, same smug tilt of the head. This time, they didn't even use the umbrella. Guess rain didn't matter when you were living in a fantasy. I waited an hour, maybe 2, watching them laugh through the glass of the lobby cafe. She touched his wrist. He leaned closer. It was almost cinematic, in that shallow, forgettable way people confuse infatuation with meaning. I wasn't jealous. I was curious. Curious how long it would take before his world folded in on itself. When they finally parted, Luke walked her to her car, hand resting lightly on her back. Then he checked his phone, probably texting me something like, "Still working." I stayed until both cars disappeared into the rain. Back home, I didn't cry. Instead, I opened my design software, imported his photos again, this time layering the images, hotel lights, umbrella outlines, reflections. The result was haunting but beautiful. I named the piece Working Late. Then I uploaded it anonymously to my art page. Within an hour, it got more likes than anything I'd posted all month. People commented things like, "So emotional," and "You can feel the betrayal." If only they knew. That night, Luke came home humming, lighter than he'd been in weeks. He brought takeout and flowers, like a man trying to buy his own absolution. "Thought you could use a pick-me-up," he said. "Thanks," I replied, arranging the flowers in a vase. "What's the occasion?" "Just because," he said, kissing my temple. "You've been so patient with my schedule lately." I smiled. Patience is my specialty. He didn't catch the irony. As he unpacked dinner, I noticed his hands trembling slightly. Not guilt, just the thrill of getting away with something. He was good at that. Always had been. In college, he once cheated on a design project, copied another student's code, and still got the internship. I told him it would catch up eventually. Maybe it finally would. We ate in silence, the rain outside soft but constant. At one point, he looked up and said, "You're quiet tonight." "Just tired," I said. "Long day." "Same here," he said, and smiled like the world owed him sympathy. After dinner, he disappeared into his office for a call. I stood by the window, watching our perfect street again. The lights in every house glowed warm, like everyone was living some version of happiness. I wondered how many of them were pretending too. When his voice rose in the next room, sharp and defensive, I knew he wasn't talking to a client. I stepped quietly closer, hearing fragments. "No, she doesn't suspect anything. It's complicated. I'll fix it." I almost laughed out loud. When he came out a few minutes later, I was leaning against the counter, sipping tea. "Everything okay?" I asked. He blinked. "Yeah, just stress at work." "Of course," I said softly. "Those servers again." He froze for a split second, then nodded too quickly. "Exactly." Later, as he slept, I lay awake, scrolling through his social media. He'd changed privacy settings on everything. Amateur move. But he'd forgotten our shared cloud folder. Inside it were event photos from his startup. And there she was, Madeline Ross, standing next to him, smiling like she'd won something. I zoomed in. Her watch reflected the hotel's light fixture. Details matter. I added it to my growing collection. The next morning, I emailed a few designs to a private folder titled Phase 2. I didn't know yet what Phase 2 would be, only that it would exist. Luke left early again, briefcase swinging like a trophy. As I watched him drive off, a strange calm settled in me. Revenge wasn't a scream. It was a plan whispered in lowercase letters. By noon, I designed a mock investor newsletter layout as practice. Transparency in tech, what you don't see behind the code. It was meant as art, but the headline looked almost too real. That night, rain returned, softer this time. I poured myself a drink, stared at my reflection in the window. My eyes didn't look broken. They looked awake. Luke texted at 9:42. "Working late again. Don't wait up." I replied, "Sure, I'll keep busy." Then I turned back to my computer and renamed the folder one last time. Case study, Mirror 1, Hypocrisy. The cursor blinked, waiting. I smiled and whispered, "Let's work late." The next week began with the kind of sunshine that makes people think everything's fine. You know the type, bright enough to bleach out your problems if you squint hard enough. I didn't squint. I brewed coffee, opened my laptop, and stared at the growing folder of evidence labeled Case Study Nadra 1, Hypocrisy. It looked harmless, a few photos, screenshots, and design sketches, but it felt heavier than any file I'd ever worked on. Every image was a reminder of a truth no one else knew yet. Luke was in the shower, humming that same smug tune he'd been humming since college. He used to hum when he was nervous before presentations. Now he hummed before lying. I listened to it through the closed bathroom door, sipping my coffee like it was armor. When he came out, freshly pressed in a new grey blazer, he kissed my forehead. "Big investor call today," he said, grabbing his car keys. "Of course," I murmured. "Another late one?" "Maybe. Don't wait up." That phrase had become his personal slogan. I wondered if he ever heard how rehearsed it sounded. The front door closed, and I waited until I heard the garage shut before exhaling. I turned my attention to work. Real work, the kind that paid bills. My clients wanted branding updates, cheery logos and pastel color palettes. I was supposed to make people feel comfortable. The irony made me laugh under my breath. Between the polite email exchanges and cheery best regards, I was also designing digital traps. My art page had exploded overnight. The piece, Working Late, had gone semi-viral. Comments flooded in. "So raw. Feels like you've lived this." Oh, I had. By noon, I'd finished my freelance deadlines. Yes, actual ones, the kind that paid rent, and started sketching something new. I wanted to capture the emptiness of trust. I drew overlapping phone screens, transparent layers fading into static. It wasn't subtle, but then again, subtlety doesn't trend online. Caroline Meyer knocked at my door around 2. Her visits were like HOA violations, unexpected and always mildly insulting. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, holding a cup of herbal tea and gossip like it was her civic duty. "Just checking in," she said, peering around my living room as if looking for signs of emotional collapse. "Luke still working those long hours?" "Always," I said with a practiced smile. "He's practically married to his job." Caroline chuckled knowingly. "Well, some men just need to feel important. I'm sure he appreciates how understanding you are." "Oh, I'm the picture of understanding," I said sweetly. "It's practically my hobby." Her eyes flickered, trying to decide if I was joking. Before she could respond, my phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Luke. "You're the best. Couldn't do this without you." I almost laughed. Caroline's eyes darted to the screen, pretending not to read but clearly devouring it. I turned the phone over face down. "See? He's grateful," she said. "Always." When she finally left, I exhaled the kind of sigh that comes with relief and mild irritation. Neighbors like Caroline are like reality TV narrators. They exist to remind you that appearances matter more than truth. But I wasn't going to waste that. Gossip, after all, is just free marketing when used correctly. I went for a walk through the neighborhood to clear my head. Every driveway looked like a magazine ad. Every couple probably had a secret. Maybe not affairs, but lies of convenience, credit card debt, arguments about who forgot the trash, small things that rot beneath the mulch of civility. Back home, I opened Luke's laptop. He'd left it unlocked. Again. His arrogance was my greatest asset. I wasn't searching for proof of the affair. I had plenty. I wanted texture, context, something that would make the story believable to others. Emails. Most were mundane, about project budgets and meetings, but one stood out, a message to Madeline Ross, subject line, client strategy. The attachment name was oddly romantic, We Belong Plan.docx. I opened it. It was, disappointingly, just a financial projection file, but the tone in the body of the email, too familiar. "Can't wait to go over this with you in person. Same spot tomorrow." I took another photo, the digital kind of theft that feels both clean and satisfying. By evening, I had enough data to build a believable web of hypocrisy. If Luke's company ever got questioned, those little correspondences would look like insider leaks. My design mind clicked into gear. Layouts, typography, metadata, it all became art. Revenge disguised as organization. Around 7, Luke texted, "Grabbing dinner with the team." "Don't wait up." I replied, "Bring me leftovers if you remember." He didn't. Instead, around 10, I saw his car again on the Madison Hotel's security feed. Yes, that feed. I'd found a public camera across the street streaming to a traffic app. A bit of digital creativity, and I could view the parking lot whenever I wanted. No laws broken, just pixels doing their job. His car was there. Same time, same pattern. Predictability is such a comforting flaw. I didn't drive out this time. I didn't need to. Instead, I created. I opened a blank digital canvas and designed something resembling a newsletter. Bold header, minimalist style, the kind of aesthetic that screamed tech professional. Headline: Transparency issues in local startups. Beneath it, placeholder paragraphs that could easily be filled with anonymous concerns about one particular company's ethical practices. Nothing explicit, just breadcrumbs, the kind of breadcrumbs that investors love to follow. By midnight, I'd designed 5 layouts. I didn't know when I'd use them, but having them ready felt like power. I saved the files in a hidden folder and backed them up on a separate drive, a different project folder. Case study Thermometer 2, Reflections. The next morning, Luke noticed I was unusually cheerful. "Sleep well?" he asked, pouring coffee. "Like a rock," I said. "You?" "Exhausted. Meetings ran late again." "I figured. You work too hard." He smiled, thinking it was admiration. "It's worth it," he said. "For who?" I wondered. Later that day, my friend Dylan stopped by the studio. He owned a small print shop downtown, half client, half confidant. He looked around at my sketches and raised an eyebrow. "You're in a mood," he said. "Creative one," I corrected. He leaned against the desk. "This piece here, working late, it's blowing up online. You thinking of making it a series?" "Something like that." He studied me for a moment. "You look focused." "That's usually when you're planning something." I shrugged. "Maybe I am. Maybe I'm just illustrating reality." He grinned. "If you ever need prints or custom envelopes, you know I'll run them for free." "Noted," I said, already thinking of ways that might come in handy. That evening, I attended the neighborhood barbecue Luke insisted we couldn't skip. "Optics," he said. "People notice when we disappear." Optics. That word fit him too well. The event was crowded, kids running around, music, Caroline holding court near the buffet like a suburban monarch. Luke showed up late, shirt slightly untucked, a little too relaxed. Madeline was there too. My pulse stayed steady. She stood across the lawn, chatting with Luke's colleague Tom Weaver. I watched her laugh. Too loud, too deliberate. Luke's eyes found mine once, maybe checking if I'd noticed. I smiled at him and raised my glass. He looked away. At one point, I joined a conversation circle with Tom, Luke, and Caroline. She was telling a story about a neighbor's teenage son getting caught sneaking out. "You can't hide anything in this neighborhood," she said. I smiled. "Oh, I don't know. People hide plenty. They just get better at it with age." Tom chuckled. "Sounds like experience talking." "Observation," I said. "Designers notice patterns, even the ugly ones." Luke shot me a glance, a warning look, but I pretended not to see it. I let the silence stretch until Caroline filled it with nervous laughter. "Well, secrets always come out eventually," she said, taking a sip of her wine. "I'm counting on that," I murmured. Later, as the party thinned out, Luke pulled me aside near the garage. "What was that back there?" he hissed. "The jokes." "Just conversation," I said, sipping my drink. "Why, did it sound like something else?" "Ivy," he began, but stopped when Caroline waved from a few feet away. "Everything okay?" she called. "Perfect," I said. Luke clenched his jaw, forced a smile at her, and walked away to clean up plates. I stayed behind, watching him through the reflection in the car window. He was unraveling, thread by thread, and didn't even know it. When we got home, he went straight to his office. I followed a few minutes later, standing quietly at the door. He was typing furiously, whispering to someone on the phone. "No, she doesn't suspect anything." he said softly. She's just moody. I've got it under control. My reflection stared back from the hallway mirror. I raised my eyebrows and whispered to myself, under control, sure. The next day, I put Dylan's offer to use. I sent him a small print job, nothing incriminating, just mock investor materials with neutral quotes. He didn't ask questions. He never did. By evening, I'd received the printed pieces, sleek, professional, anonymous. I held one up to the light, admiring how believable it looked. I wasn't planning to release them yet. Timing is everything. But it felt good to hold something tangible, something real in a web of digital lies. Saturday came with more rain, which somehow made me productive. I cleaned, rearranged the living room, even fixed the squeaky drawer Luke always promised to handle. It's funny how doing small things right feels powerful when someone else keeps doing big things wrong. Around noon, Caroline texted, "You and Luke look tense at the barbecue. Everything okay?" I replied, "Just fine. We're planning a trip soon." The lie was easy, almost pleasant. Let her imagination do the heavy lifting. Gossip travels faster when you feed it sugar. Luke came home that evening smelling like expensive soap and someone else's perfume. "Traffic was brutal," he said, tossing his keys on the counter. "Really?" I asked. "I didn't see much traffic on the app." He froze for half a second, then shrugged. "Maybe I left later. Must be it." He grabbed a drink, turned on the TV, and acted like everything was normal. Maybe for him, it was. I sat beside him, head on his shoulder, pretending contentment. His phone buzzed twice in his pocket. He ignored it. I smiled against his shirt and whispered, "You're really good at pretending." He looked down. "What?" "Nothing, just thinking out loud." When he went to bed, I opened my laptop again. My art page had a new follower, Madeline Ross. Her profile photo was cropped just right, the kind of image someone chooses when they want to appear casual but deliberate. She'd liked working late. Oh, the poetic symmetry of that nearly made me laugh. I spent the next hour designing something new, overlapping shapes resembling raindrops on glass, forming the silhouette of two figures under an umbrella. The caption, "Loyalty is quiet until it's not." It posted at 1:13 a.m. Within minutes, likes started rolling in. I closed the laptop, leaned back, and stared at the ceiling. The plan was starting to take form. Nothing outrageous, nothing illegal, just precise consequences for sloppy choices. The next morning, Luke acted nervous. He'd seen my new art piece. "You're getting dark with your work," he said over breakfast. "Art imitates life," I replied. "Or maybe it's the other way around." He smiled uneasily. "People might read into it." "Let them. That's what art's for." Later that day, I watched from the window as he drove off for another meeting. Same blazer, same cologne. I imagined his reflection in the hotel's glass lobby, all charm and confidence. I wondered how much longer that confidence would last once truth started echoing around him. That evening, I made my move. Nothing dramatic, just a simple act. I created an anonymous email account and attached one of the digital newsletters I'd designed. I sent it to a single address, Tom Weaver, the investor neighbor. Subject line, concerned employee tip. Inside, just a few lines. Certain managerial behaviors at Carvatech raise questions about transparency and ethics. Please review the attached article before the next funding round. No accusations, just curiosity planted like a seed. Then I closed the laptop, poured wine, and sat by the window as rain began again. Across the street, Caroline's lights flickered through the curtains, probably gossiping on the phone. Somewhere downtown, Luke was probably laughing under another umbrella. Let him laugh. The rain always finds its way in. When he returned home close to midnight, hair damp, he looked distracted. "Rough night," he said. "Server crash again." "Of course," I replied, handing him a towel. "You must hate storms by now." He nodded, not catching the meaning. He never did. When he finally went to bed, I stayed up a little longer, sketching. the outline of a storm cloud forming above two figures. Below it, a title, The Forecast. I smiled, saved the file, and whispered, "Let's make it rain." The weekend arrived with an almost cinematic grey sky, the kind that feels like the world is holding its breath. I sat at my desk, tea in one hand, stylus in the other, staring at the images I'd collected over the past 2 weeks. Luke's car at the hotel, his half-hidden texts, the snippets of his conversations. All of it lay neatly organized in folders, labeled with my usual ironic flair. Case study, Maga 1, hypocrisy. Phase 2, reflections. And now, blueprints. It was the most satisfying project I'd ever undertaken, and no client had ever paid me for something so thrilling. I didn't need to go after him with confrontations or arguments. Subtlety was my ally, and precision my weapon. I had learned the art of restraint over the years, watching patterns, noticing inconsistencies, and then moving when the time was right. That time had begun. By mid-morning, Dylan dropped by, as reliable as ever, carrying a small cardboard box. "Delivery from the print shop," he said, smiling. He always smiled like he already knew something exciting was going on, but was too polite to ask. I thanked him and set the box on the table. Inside were several professionally printed documents, investor newsletters, mock corporate reports, and some sketches I'd created with layered photographs and subtle annotations that made it all appear authentic. "They're perfect," I said, running my fingers over the smooth paper. Exactly the right tone. Corporate concern, not personal vendetta. He grinned. "Glad I could help. You know I'd never ask questions." "That's why you're valuable," I replied, tapping his shoulder. "Now, if anyone asks, it's just art. Purely art." Once Dylan left, I began assembling the first anonymous packages. One for Tom Weaver, the neighbor and primary investor, another for a few select addresses I had discovered through public filings, and one extra, just in case. Each contained the same materials: the newsletter, digital attachments printed out, and a brief note from a supposedly concerned employee. I wrote them carefully, choosing words that implied ethical concern without directly accusing anyone. This was no courtroom. I was creating consequences without breaking any rules. By the time the sun dipped low, I had everything ready. I paused to glance at Luke's office across the hall. He was at his desk, fingers tapping against the keyboard, completely unaware that his carefully curated image was being dismantled one page at a time. His confidence was enviable, if it weren't so oblivious. The first real test came when I followed Madeline one evening. She was leaving work, phone in hand, completely engrossed in a conversation with Luke, or at least that's what I assumed. I parked a few blocks away and trailed her, careful not to be seen. She walked fast, heels clicking against the wet pavement, hair falling across her face in a casual style that looked effortless, but was clearly practiced. The chase wasn't cinematic or heroic. There were no narrow escapes, no rooftop leaps, just a woman trailing another, careful, quiet, patient. That was enough. Enough to create tension, to remind her that her actions had consequences. She reached her car, unlocked it, and leaned in to place her bag in the passenger seat. I watched from behind a street lamp. The reflection of the street light on her car window gave me an idea. I stepped closer, careful, and used a small applicator to leave a temporary, washable message on her hood. Working late? Nothing permanent, nothing illegal. Just a message that would cause panic and confusion. I stepped back into the shadows, smiling faintly. That little act, absurd and minor in any other context, was pure theatre. By the time she returned to her car hours later, she'd panic, check the windows, and wonder if someone had seen. And by then, Luke's carefully constructed world would begin to wobble. Back home, I sorted through my growing collection of evidence. Every photo, every document, every note I had gathered could be used to create layers of consequences. It wasn't about confrontation, it was about control. Each element I placed, each package I sent, each subtle act of mischief chipped away at their sense of security. Luke's texts continued, oblivious, each one reinforcing his belief that everything was normal. Working late, see you soon. Had to stay late again, don't wait up. Predictable, comforting for him, dangerous for him. I saved each one, organized by date and time, into a spreadsheet that would eventually form the backbone of my digital dossier. The next few days passed in a rhythm that was both mundane and intense. I continued my freelance work in the mornings, focusing on logos and web layouts, and devoted afternoons to observation, sketches, and planning. Each evening brought new insights, snippets of conversations, public appearances, moments where Luke and Madeline's dynamic faltered in subtle ways. I noted them all. Nothing too obvious, nothing I couldn't legally capture. Just life. One evening, while Luke was out working late, I received a call from Dylan. Hey, just confirming. You're still using the layouts for printing, right? The ones with the corporate letters? Yes, I said. Timing's crucial. I want the first packages in the right hands by Friday. He chuckled. You're meticulous. I like it. Just careful, okay? Always, I said, though in truth, I had never been more careful. Friday arrived, rainy and grey, a perfect mirror for the tension simmering beneath the surface. I dressed in dark, nondescript clothing, grabbed my bag, and drove to the post office. The packages went out without incident, each stamped and mailed, anonymous but undeniable. Every detail had been checked twice. Addresses, labels, return addresses left blank. I smiled quietly, imagining the ripple effect that would follow. Returning home, I brewed tea and sat by the window, watching the rain trace patterns down the glass. The world seemed slower outside, almost indifferent, but inside, the momentum of my plan felt electric. I pulled up social media, just out of habit, and saw a comment on my art post. This feels so real, like you've been living it. I smirked. They had no idea. That evening, Madeline's car appeared in the driveway across the street. She parked haphazardly, glanced around nervously, and disappeared inside. Perfect timing. I stepped outside and used the reflection in the car's hood to make sure my temporary message was visible. It was faint, but noticeable. Small things matter. The next morning, I imagined her discovering it and panicking. The ripple effect had already begun. Back inside, I reviewed the documents one last time. Each piece had a subtle hint, a breadcrumb, a suggestion that something was off. No direct accusations, only context. My plan was unfolding like a slow, deliberate domino effect. Luke had no idea that each choice he made, each lie he told, was contributing to a collapse that would feel almost inevitable from the outside. Late that night, I heard him return. He was lighter than usual, whistling softly, entirely unaware. He passed through the living room, glanced at me, reading on the couch, and smiled. Working on your designs again, he asked. Yes, I said, smiling back. Keeping busy. He nodded, satisfied, and went to his office. I stayed put, watching the glow of his computer screen through the open door. His focus was absolute, entirely misplaced. Little did he know, his empire of trust was beginning to fracture with every unread email, every unseen message, every anonymous package in someone else's hands. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat back, feeling the thrill of quiet power. The first act of real, visible revenge had been set into motion. The next steps would require patience, observation, and a steady hand. I spent the next few hours sketching, adding details to my growing portfolio, overlapping umbrellas, abstracted silhouettes of two figures, shadows of city lights. Every line and curve had meaning. Every color choice was intentional. Art and strategy blended seamlessly. By midnight, I had prepared digital files for a second wave of subtle disruptions, anonymous emails, carefully worded messages to contacts, hints in public forums. Nothing illegal, nothing reckless, just consequences arranged with precision. My hand hovered over the final send button, imagining the tension it would create without ever confronting anyone directly. Luke slept, unaware. Madeline had no idea, and I, Ivy Carver, had never felt more alive. Patience had its own thrill, a quiet satisfaction that came from knowing the next domino would fall exactly as intended. I closed the laptop, poured another glass of wine, and leaned back in my chair. The rain outside had turned into a gentle drizzle, soft against the windows. The world was calm, deceptive in its normalcy, and I sat in the center of it, orchestrating consequences like a conductor with an invisible symphony. The first packages were out, the message on the car was planted, and the next wave, the digital exposure, was ready. It was only a matter of time before Luke and Madeline realized that their carefully constructed world wasn't invincible. And when they did, it would be too late to undo any of it. I glanced at the wall where sketches of umbrellas and overlapping silhouettes were pinned, the beginnings of a narrative I had created from their lives. Every image, every detail, was a step toward the final revelation. I whispered to myself, not loud enough to wake anyone. Soon, everything changes. The city hummed outside, indifferent, while I planned, watched, and waited. The storm was over for now, but I could feel the tension building. This was the calm before the collapse, the quiet before the chaos, and I was perfectly positioned to watch it unfold. The pieces were set. All that remained was execution. And execution, as I had learned, was best served quietly, deliberately, and with a smile. The morning was deceptively calm, the kind of suburban calm that makes people think everything is as it should be. Trimmed hedges, identical mailboxes, quiet streets. I sipped my coffee at the kitchen table, eyes drifting to the growing stack of documents and printed materials that had arrived from Dylan's shop overnight. Each one felt heavier than it looked, not physically, but the weight of consequences. My careful planning was starting to press against the edges of Luke's world, even if he hadn't realized it yet. Luke came downstairs, hair messy, tie slightly crooked, pretending like the chaos of his professional life was invisible. "Morning," he said, voice casual. "Coffee?" "I made some," I said, pouring him a cup, noting the way he automatically reached for sugar, the ritual that made him feel in control. "Thanks," he said, sitting at the table, glancing over my shoulder at the documents. "What are you working on?" "Just sketches," I said, careful not to reveal anything. "Nothing important." He nodded, unconcerned. That was his greatest mistake, assuming I was always occupied with trivialities. The truth was, I had never been more focused. Each sketch, each design, each document I printed or sent anonymously was a step closer to dismantling him, quietly and effectively. By late morning, I had packed a few more documents into discreet envelopes for anonymous distribution. The trick wasn't overt confrontation, it was patience, precision, and letting the dominoes fall naturally. I double-checked addresses, verified labels, and ensured nothing could be traced back to me. Each detail mattered. The illusion of randomness would make the impact more convincing. Around noon, Caroline Meyer showed up unannounced again, as though she had an internal clock set to monitor my emotional state. She stood on the porch, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the lawn with the intensity of a traffic camera. "Morning, Ivy," she said. "Luke still working those long hours?" "Always," I said, smiling pleasantly. "He's practically married to his projects." Caroline's lips pressed into a line that tried to appear sympathetic but failed. "Well, some men need to feel important," she said. "I'm sure he appreciates your support." "Oh, I'm very supportive," I said. "It's practically a hobby." Her eyes narrowed slightly. Did she notice the sarcasm? Probably not. Most people never do until it's too late. She lingered a moment, scanning the living room, then turned to leave. I hope everything is okay. You look composed. Thank you, I said, waving. I try. Once she left, I turned back to my laptop. My designs had taken on a life of their own. Abstracted umbrellas, overlapping silhouettes, faint city lights blending into shadows. Each one subtly mirrored the betrayal I had documented, yet no one would recognize it as evidence without context. My art had become both camouflage and weapon. By mid-afternoon, the neighborhood buzzed with the usual tension. Gossip drifting from one manicured lawn to another. Luke, oblivious, walked past the windows, briefcase in hand, focused on his phone, completely unaware of the invisible web tightening around him. Madeline had been spotted again, this time leaving a cafe near the tech district, hurriedly entering a taxi as though she were on some clandestine mission. I noted it, mentally sketching a scenario that would eventually expose her to the scrutiny she so freely ignored in others. Later, at an HOA gathering, I executed a small act that was far more satisfying than confrontation, observation. Luke and Madeline arrived, impeccably dressed, trying to appear casual. Caroline was already there, orchestrating social interactions with the ease of a seasoned diplomat. I joined the group quietly, pretending to mingle, listening to snippets of conversation, noting the glances Luke exchanged with Madeline. They were careful, rehearsed, but the cracks were visible to someone paying attention. I commented casually on a discussion about community gardening, subtly dropping references to honesty and transparency. Luke smiled nervously, and Madeline laughed a little too loudly. Their tension was almost tangible, and I did nothing to intervene. Observation was part of the plan. Panic or guilt would come in its own time. During a lull in conversation, I wandered near the refreshments, where a few of Luke's investors and acquaintances had gathered. I passed a printed version of one of my newsletters on the table, placed carefully, face down. Later, someone would pick it up, read the neutral but pointed text, and begin to wonder about the integrity of certain managerial practices. Nothing was overt. Nothing could be traced to me. The power of suggestion was far more effective than confrontation. Luke tried to corner me later with a casual comment. "You're awfully quiet tonight," he said. "Not like you." "I'm just observing," I replied smoothly, taking a sip of water. "Sometimes watching is more informative than talking." His jaw tightened slightly. I allowed myself a small, internal smirk. That moment, the tiny tremor of awareness, was precisely what I had been cultivating. When the evening began to wind down, Luke attempted a more direct approach, pulling me aside near the edge of the event. "Ivy, those comments earlier, what did you mean?" I looked at him, calm, measured, eyes steady. "What comments? I was just talking about community projects. You know me, I get passionate about public spaces." He frowned, frustration evident but contained. It felt pointed. Pointed? "Oh, Luke, pointed is how you get noticed. I was just making conversation." He glanced at the crowd, then nodded, suppressing his irritation. "Right." I moved away, blending into a group discussing the upcoming neighborhood cleanup, letting him stew in uncertainty. That quiet dissonance, uncertain, anxious, is what I had been aiming for. Once home, Luke retreated to his office, absorbed in work, oblivious that the first ripple of consequence had already begun. I poured myself a glass of wine, watching him from the doorway. The glow of his computer screen illuminated his tense features. He did not yet know that the documents I had sent would start appearing in unexpected inboxes, that whispers would begin circulating, and that his image was no longer entirely under his control. Later that night, I reviewed my designs once more. Each image, each document, each sketch now had a deeper layer. Umbrellas in rain, silhouettes, faint reflections of hotel lights, subtle annotations hinting at timing and observation. Every piece had purpose and context. Each one would contribute to the narrative I was constructing, slowly and meticulously. My phone buzzed. A message from Dylan. "How's phase 2 coming?" "On track," I typed back. "The pieces are in place." He replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji. I smiled faintly. Dylan always trusted my vision, and that trust made him an ally in this quiet war I was orchestrating. Around midnight, I heard Luke's car return. He was later than usual, drenched from rain, smelling faintly of coffee and cologne, as if he believed outward appearances could cover internal cracks. He passed by me without comment, heading to his office as though nothing had changed. I stayed in the living room, laptop open, organizing files and adjusting layouts for the next wave. I plotted subtle, controlled disruptions, emails that suggested scrutiny, documents implying ethical concerns, hints that would make investors pause and question. All anonymous, all plausible. When I finally closed the laptop, I poured a final glass of wine and looked out the window. The rain had stopped, leaving behind slick streets reflecting the neighborhood lights like a faint mirror of my plans. Luke slept, Madeline believed she was untouchable, and Carolyn thought she had the moral high ground. All illusions, all temporary. I stepped back from the window, glanced at the wall of pinned sketches, and whispered to myself, "Control is quiet until it's revealed." The pieces were aligning. Patience had turned into strategy, observation into leverage. And as the night deepened, I felt the calm thrill of knowing the next wave of consequences would arrive without warning, but completely expected by me. Luke's unraveling had begun, not with confrontation or shouting, but with small, precise actions executed with care. The perfect wife, the perfect observer, the quiet architect of inevitable exposure. I settled into bed, laptop shut, mind racing with possibilities. The next steps would require continued patience, subtlety, and perfect timing. By the time the world noticed, it would be too late to reverse anything. And for the first time in months, I felt entirely awake. The storm was coming, and I would be ready to watch it unfold. I closed my eyes, knowing tomorrow would bring new opportunities, observation, patience, strategy, the trifecta of control. And I had all three in spades. The neighborhood appeared serene, innocent even, but behind every trimmed hedge and polite smile, consequences were quietly taking root. By morning, the first whispers would begin. By evening, the cracks would widen. I exhaled, letting a faint smile curve my lips. The perfect wife wasn't quiet because she lacked power. She was quiet because she understood how to use it. And Luke, Madeline, and everyone else, soon they would understand exactly what that meant. Saturday morning arrived with a soft drizzle, the kind that blurred the edges of the world and made everything appear slightly uncertain. Perfect weather for what I had planned. I sipped coffee at the kitchen table, glancing at the stack of printed materials from Dylan. Each envelope, each carefully designed newsletter, each mock investor report was now more than just paper. It was leverage, tension waiting to be realized. Luke had no idea the storm had already begun in slow motion. The first signs of ripple effects came quickly. Around mid-morning, a neighbor mentioned at a community garden meeting that he'd received an unexpected email raising concerns about Luke's startup. Another acquaintance noticed a strange newsletter circulating online, asking questions about transparency and leadership. No names, no accusations, just enough uncertainty to make the people who mattered start whispering. Each reaction was satisfying, the slow but inevitable unraveling, starting without me doing anything in person. I spent the morning finalizing details for the next stage. Small tweaks to my digital portfolio, subtle references to timing, overlapping images hinting at truths Luke thought were hidden. Each design was layered, a puzzle only a careful observer could decode. I wanted it to feel natural, unforced, chaos disguised as ordinary life. By noon, Madeline had been spotted at a cafe near her office, glancing nervously around as though she had misplaced her composure. I had followed her. The morning light was sharper than usual, cutting through the curtains with an almost accusatory clarity. I brewed coffee and sipped it slowly, savoring the quiet. Today was not ordinary. It was the culmination of weeks of observation, planning, and subtle manipulations. The documents, the digital messages, the sketches, and the carefully planted whispers had all been steps toward this moment. The stage was set, and the audience would be more captivated than anyone expected. I walked through the house, checking my workspace one last time. The printed newsletters were stacked neatly, ready for distribution should I need a final push. My laptop hummed quietly on the desk, files open, screens displaying designs that hinted at truth without spelling it out. Everything had a layer of subtlety, an invisible thread tying observations to outcomes. I was the quiet architect of inevitability. Luke arrived home later than usual, his posture stiff, his expression tighter than it had been in weeks. I noted every detail, the slight tremor in his hands as he set his briefcase down, the rapid glance toward the living room, the half-formed words that didn't make it past his lips. He had begun to sense that the world was shifting beneath his carefully constructed facade, and the feeling unsettled him. He tried casual conversation as a defense mechanism, but I was unmoved. "Working late again?" I asked, not as a question but as an observation. The faint rise in his eyebrows betrayed recognition. He faltered, then quickly masked it. I smiled subtly, knowing that the cracks were already showing. The final stage of my plan involved public exposure, but not through confrontation. It required finesse, theater, and control of perception. I had arranged an exhibition at a local gallery, ostensibly to showcase my latest emotional illustrations. Each piece, while visually captivating, contained layers referencing Luke's duplicity and the unraveling of his affairs. Umbrellas, overlapping silhouettes, and reflections of city lights formed a visual narrative only I fully understood. The gallery filled quickly. Neighbors, acquaintances, and even some of Luke's professional contacts arrived, curious about the new exhibition. Caroline Meyer was present, clipboard in hand, trying to appear casual while clearly scrutinizing everything. The tension in the room was palpable, though most attendees were unaware of its true source. Luke entered with an air of forced nonchalance. Madeline followed, attempting a semblance of composure, though her eyes flickered nervously across the room. I observed from across the gallery, a quiet smile playing on my lips. The first whispers began almost immediately, as attendees recognized familiar figures and locations subtly encoded in my illustrations. Comments like, "Is that?" and "It looks like a hotel near downtown," drifted across the room, faint but purposeful. I moved among the crowd with the ease of someone blending in while still controlling the narrative. My attention was divided between casual conversation and watching Luke's reactions. Every glance, every hesitation, every moment of visible unease was a confirmation that my plan was working. The carefully placed hints were unraveling the illusion of his control without a word from me. Midway through the exhibition, Luke and Madeline approached one of the larger pieces, an abstract depiction of overlapping umbrellas in a rainy cityscape. The silhouettes were vague, almost impressionistic, but the timing and context were unmistakable to anyone who had followed their pattern. Luke froze, eyes narrowing as he recognized subtle elements he hadn't anticipated anyone noticing. Madeline's hand trembled slightly as she tried to cover it with a casual gesture. I stepped closer, offering a polite smile. "Interesting, isn't it? How small actions can appear completely ordinary until you notice the pattern." Luke blinked rapidly. I don't understand," he stammered, voice tight. Patterns reveal themselves in time, I said softly. Sometimes it's the quiet moments that speak the loudest. Madeleine glanced at him, her expression faltering as she realized that this was no casual artistic statement. The room had started to murmur. Neighbors, friends, and even a few of Luke's investors had begun piecing together the subtle cues embedded in the artwork. The realization spread gradually, like sunlight breaking through clouds, unavoidable and illuminating. I moved to another piece, an illustration showing abstracted reflections of hotel lights in rain-soaked streets. The placement was deliberate, the timing, the angles, the shadows, all drawn from real events I had documented. Luke's gaze flicked to it, recognition dawning. His hand clenched unconsciously at his side. "Do you recognize it?" I asked quietly, more rhetorical than needing an answer. He shook his head, though his expression betrayed everything he didn't say. By now, the atmosphere had shifted. People whispered, glanced, and murmured speculations that spread like wildfire. The curated anonymity of my illustrations had achieved exactly what I intended, the audience connecting dots that Luke and Madeleine thought were invisible. Their panic was subtle, internal, yet palpable enough to radiate outward. Madeleine tried to regain composure, forcing a smile, but it faltered when a neighbor pointed at a detail in one of the sketches, a car parked outside a hotel, recognizable to those familiar with the area. "That's the Madison, isn't it?" someone whispered. Madeleine's lips parted slightly, caught off guard. Luke's eyes darted around the room, searching for control. I remained calm, almost casual, sipping water, as though observing a mundane scene rather than orchestrating its unraveling. The quiet control was more potent than confrontation. It left Luke and Madeleine exposed, their confidence crumbling under the weight of subtle public scrutiny. A few more attendees began discussing the pieces among themselves, noting familiar details, speculating about connections, and sharing insights with each other. The whispers reached Luke, and he finally realized that the web of exposure had extended beyond private messages and anonymous emails. It was now a living, breathing presence in the room, visible in the collective attention of everyone present. He approached me, voice tight. "Ivy, what is all this?" "Art," I said, smiling. "Observational, emotional, interpretive, just like life itself." His jaw tightened. It's personal." "Sometimes art is personal," I replied evenly. "But that doesn't mean it isn't true." Madeleine stood beside him, silent, her composure unraveling. She glanced at the nearest sketch and saw herself and Luke rendered in shadows and light, interactions captured in abstraction but unmistakably present. Her hand trembled as she clutched her purse, and for the first time, I saw fear, not the manufactured tension she projected, but real, subtle fear. I moved closer to the center of the gallery, letting the attention of the crowd fall where it naturally would. Conversations intensified, whispers sharpened, and Luke's attempts to regain composure failed. Every careful lie, every hidden action, every moment he had assumed was private, now had tangible representation in the form of visual evidence. "Patterns reveal themselves," I said again, almost softly, repeating the phrase that had become my mantra throughout this process. Even small choices leave traces. Even quiet betrayals have echoes. Luke's face paled slightly, though he tried to mask it. He glanced at Madeleine, who seemed to shrink in place, realizing that control had shifted irrevocably. The room continued to murmur, the tension palpable, yet no one had said anything confrontational. No words were needed. The audience had understood everything from the context, from the subtle storytelling embedded in my work. I watched as he attempted to maintain composure, scanning faces, searching for allies, for reassurance, for a lifeline that did not exist. Every glance he cast, every hesitation, only amplified the effect. He had built a life on perception and control, and perception had turned against him. Madeline tried to speak, her voice small. It's just art, she said. Yes, I said, voice calm, deliberate. Art and life are often indistinguishable, aren't they? He swallowed hard, realizing that the whispers and glances around him were not coincidences. The careful, subtle chaos I had orchestrated had reached its peak. Every minor act of observation, every note, every sketch, every anonymously sent document now culminated in this moment of undeniable clarity. I walked slowly toward the exit, giving him a final look over my shoulder. His expression was a mixture of shock, frustration, and a dawning understanding of the scale of his exposure. The crowd's attention lingered on him, and he could feel it, the invisible judgment, the subtle awareness that his private missteps were now visible to all. I reached the front doors, pausing to glance back one last time. Luke's shoulders were slumped slightly, Madeline's posture rigid and uncertain. The whispers had turned into a low hum of conversation, all centered around the patterns I had revealed without ever naming names. The control they had assumed was theirs had evaporated. As I stepped out into the rain, the city lights reflecting on the wet pavement, I felt a rare satisfaction. Not triumph born of confrontation, not vengeance wrought through chaos, but a quiet, deliberate victory achieved through patience, observation, and strategy. The storm had passed over them while leaving me untouched, standing in the calm aftermath with a full understanding of the power I had wielded. The rain soaked my coat, the droplets running down the sleeves, mixing with the faint trace of city grime. It didn't matter. I walked steadily, purposefully, feeling the weight of weeks of planning dissolve into the satisfaction of completion. Luke and Madeline had been stripped of control, exposed publicly, without a single raised voice or aggressive act. The consequences were clear, precise, and irreversible in perception. I paused at the end of the block, looking back at the gallery lights fading behind me. The neighborhood appeared serene, as though nothing had changed, yet everything had. The patterns were clear to those who looked closely, and the illusion of perfection had been irrevocably shattered. A final text from Dylan arrived. Well done. I smiled, slipping my phone back into my pocket. The storm had ended, but the impact lingered, rippling quietly through the lives of those who had underestimated the subtle power of patience, observation, and calculated exposure. I turned and walked down the street, rain reflecting the glow of street lamps, feeling a clarity I had not known for months. Luke and Madeline would be left to pick up the pieces, but I was already moving forward, free from the weight of their deception, standing in the quiet power of the storm I had orchestrated. The last umbrella sketch, pinned to my wall at home, seemed almost alive in the dim light, shadows stretching across the lines. It had been a forecast, a warning, a representation of what comes when quiet observation meets deliberate action. And as I closed the door behind me, stepping fully into the night, I felt the unspoken truth settle around me. The final act was complete. The consequences, carefully layered and unavoidable, had taken effect. The gallery lights faded in memory, but the impact remained, absolute and undeniable. The last laugh was mine,